In 1994, a tech company by the name of Fromsoftware, based in Tokyo, Japan, decided to stop making office software and began to work on their first venture into the video game industry, with a first-person dungeon crawler RPG called Kingsfield. Hi, I'm Grim, and today we're taking a brief dive into Kingsfield. The original game was released solely in Japan, where it was initially met with mixed reviews due to the high level of difficulty. However, once it had made its way into the hands of gamers, word quickly spread about this intricately detailed and difficult dungeon crawler, eventually turning it into a commercial success. In this video, I'll go over the story, gameplay, and a bit of the technical side of things. This is my first video, so please keep that in mind when watching this, and if you enjoy, please be sure to like and subscribe. Thank you. There was a small country called Verdite, surrounded by a deep forest encircled by fog and whirling winds. In ancient days, when a great battle was fought and many were dying, Verdite was saved by a person who then disappeared into the forest. Only the forest's drifting fog knew who this person was. The citizens called their savior the Dragon of the Forest, and built a sanctuary and honored this person there. Eventually, only a legend remained, and the sanctuary was changed into the royal graveyard and all was silent. But the legend says someday the Dragon of the Forest shall return, bearing magical artifacts. However, the time has not yet come, and the sanctuary sleeps deeply. In Kingsfield, you play as John Alfred Forrester, the son of Hauser Forrester, a proud swordsman, and Zola Reinhardt, a descendant of the royal family of Verdite. The royal family of Verdite had been practicers of evil magic, possibly due to the ancient evil residing beneath the land. John's mother Zola, however, was a benevolent person and so removed from her evil bloodline that she had no malice within her. She did, however, still possess the magic of her clan. When John was born, he was born with the magical power of light, the first and only of his bloodline to receive this power. As John grew, he watched and learned from his father closely, and his only desire was to become a swordmaster like his father. As the years passed, the ancient evil residing beneath the land had grown restless, and monsters had begun to feed on the blood and souls of the local population. The ancient evil grew more powerful by the day. John's father, Hauser Forrester, was assigned to defeat the ancient evil within the royal cemetery of Verdite, and so the royal garrison, led by Hauser, descended upon the cemetery, never to be seen again. John had to watch his father, his idol, leave without him, as he was too young to join the royal army. One night, John was awakened by a mysterious voice. It was beckoning him from a great distance, and it was calling him by name. John followed the voice as if he were under a spell. It led him across the land and through the forests until he arrived at an ancient and abandoned cemetery. Ahead of him, there were two massive stone doors, and from behind them, the voice spoke once again, calling him by name and allowing him entry. Though awestruck, John Alfred Forrester pushed forward as the doors slowly opened. A bright light shone from within, so bright it brought him to his knees. A voice proclaimed John as its champion. Born with the power of light and pure of heart, he received its gift and entered the crypt. The game begins inside the crypt. The first floor is very important. It has the vast majority of friendly NPCs on it, and it also has some other amenities that I'll be returning for multiple times during my playthrough. Immediately, I find a room. The sign outside says it belongs to the groundskeeper Ozzy Randvalgvi. Wow, what a name. Although when I enter the room, no one's here. As I venture further, I happen upon a church. Seems like a weird place for a church, but who am I to question people living in a crypt? Inside we find Jude's Cross. I think that's the pronunciation here. Anyway, he's a priest. Cross has lost his golden cross. Right. And he needs me to find it, as it's worth more to him than his life. Once again, who am I to question someone living in a crypt? So I guess I'm hunting for a cross. In the adjacent room, there's another person. It's Ozzy, the caretaker of the graveyard. Apparently, he learned fencing from John's father. He recognizes John as Hauser's son and expresses his deep admiration for Hauser. Ozzy wishes he could help John out with a map, but he apparently just sold it to a suspicious parent and his child. If you're immediately suspicious of someone, maybe don't give them something as important as the only map to a massive, dangerous underground cemetery in which your mentor has just disappeared. But that's just my take on the matter. Well, as far as initiating a story, this at least gives me something to go on. Find a cross and possibly a map while delving deeper and looking for John's father. I'd like to take a moment to quickly touch on the controls. They're a bit strange, mostly because the game was released prior to analog sticks. It was meant to be played on the original PlayStation controller before the DualShock, which was essentially just a Super Nintendo controller with an extra set of shoulder buttons. Movement uses a directional pad, forward, backward, left and right for turning, which is extremely slow. Just have a look. Strafing is bound to L1 and R1. Looking up and down is bound to L2 and R2. Square casts your magic, and triangle attacks with your melee weapon. Now the part that really screwed me up for most of the game was X and circle. Normally in a game, X is used for confirmation in menus, and circle is used to go back. Except in this game, that's reversed. Circle is confirmation, and X is to go back. I'm pretty sure this was just left over from the Super Nintendo, which has B in the position where X is, and A in the position where circle is. Anyway, back to the game. While exploring, I came across a locked wall. And directly across the hallway, there's an unlocked wall. And inside are some giant spiders, so I take this opportunity to try out the combat. I can definitely see some distant similarities to Dark Souls here. Positioning is very important, because thankfully, the enemies turn as slowly as you do, so you can benefit greatly from striking from behind. When your attack lands, it'll stagger the enemy, and this causes their attack to cancel. So if you time your strikes well, you can go through entire fights without taking any damage. Enemies will usually attack on sight, but their range isn't very far, and they almost always have small areas around them that they can't leave, which is very easy to exploit. It gets a bit more complicated when magic gets involved. Some enemies have spells, and they can hit pretty damn hard, especially in the late game, but we'll get into that on later floors. The magic system is pretty great. You of course get offensive spells, starting with Light Needle, which is pretty weak, but can be used effectively to stagger enemies before attacking them to avoid damage. Later, you'll get increasingly more powerful spells, such as Wind Cutter, Fireball, and eventually Lightning Bolt, which is the most powerful spell. You also get defensive and support spells, like Resist Fire and Cure Poison. Looking at the top of the screen, you'll see the HP and MP gauges, which do look a bit familiar, but the other two are basically stamina. When you attack with melee, your power gauge drops, and the speed at which it comes back depends on what weapon you're using. The heavier the weapon, the slower it'll renew. That power gauge affects how much damage you do. You can attack even when it's empty, but it won't do any damage. Your damage will increase as the gauge refills, so it almost seems like an early version of a charged attack. Next, the magic gauge is essentially magic stamina, except you can only use spells when it's full, and the more advanced the spell, the longer it'll take to refill. Anyway, I run around, kill some monsters, and get a couple of levels, while I get a feel for the first floor. While fighting enemies, I get affected by two different status effects: paralysis and poison. Paralysis slows your movement and turning down to a crawl, but you can attack normally. So as long as you're not surrounded by enemies, you'll probably be fine until it wears off naturally. Poison is pretty self-explanatory. It takes away your health until it also wears off over time. A little further along, I find a shop run by Wilfred Light of the Venerable Light family. Wilfred supposedly worked as a supply master for the army's previous expeditions into the crypt, and just liked being in a crypt so much, he decided to stay. Right, so he's absolutely insane. He gives me a light sales pitch. and I check out his wares. Seems pretty standard. There are healing items, weapons and armor, regular shop stuff. Although, seeing as I just started, I have next to no money and can't afford anything. Well, I figure I'll poke around the area a bit here and see what I can find. Wait, hold on a second. Is it just me, or does this guy look exactly like Eric Cartman from South Park? Sorry, I just had to bring it up. Let's move on. Directly next to the shop is another separate room, with a knight sitting in front of a fireplace, staring into the flames. This is Basque Kreese, a military guard, who was under the command of John's father. He says he was ordered to stay here while Hauser and his men continued on to the lower floors, and he hasn't heard from them in a while. At this point, we can assume any military personnel we come across was under the command of Hauser Forrester. I continue forward past the shop into a maze-like area of the map. Because everything looks exactly the same here, it's extremely easy to get lost. I spent a lot more time here than I thought I would, and maybe got lost once or twice. But I end up finding a corpse. Not just a regular skeleton, but a scholar. On his corpse is a dragon cup. And nearby, scratched into the wall, the scholar wrote that he had taken the cup from the dragon temple, and that caused the water of the fountain to dry up. He begs whoever might be reading to bring the cup back to the temple. I really like this. Environmental storytelling mixed with some non-linear gameplay. So far, Kingsfield is an absolute gem. I continue to find my way through the maze-like area, and happen across a new piece of armor, and some healing items. Just outside, I get my first weapon upgrade, a knight's sword. One thing I'm not a fan of is that you can't see what stats a weapon or piece of armor has until you equip it, and then look at your status screen and either take off everything else you have equipped to see the individual item stats, or, if you know everything else's stats, just subtracting those from your defensive and offensive totals. I move north into an area of the map I haven't been yet. I'm killing monsters and getting a few levels thanks to the high spawn rate. Basically, if you turn around and walk a very short distance and come back, enemies will have respawned, which is great if you're trying to get a few levels, but it's not so good if you're just trying to get from point A to point B quickly. As I approach a fork in the path, I notice another NPC. He's down on all fours and seems to be going at the ground pretty hard. He asks if I've seen a young person around. It's his son. Apparently, they had an argument and he ran off. This is the suspicious person Ozzy was telling me about earlier. Maybe if I find his son, they'll give me the map. I make my way east and find a sign directing me to the Dragon Temple. It's a large empty room with a small alcove where I found out I can place the dragon cup I found earlier. The game doesn't actually tell you how to do this. It's not by interacting with the wall, but by going into your inventory and using the cup while standing directly in front of where it needs to be placed. The sound of rushing water can be heard as I return the cup to its rightful place. I head back west, past the guy looking for his son, and see a sign on the wall pointing to an area called the Commoner's Grave. There's a lot of scorpions in this area of the map, and it can be really annoying fighting them because of how often they can poison. The Commoner's Grave is filled with the undead, skeletons and mummies. Monsters actually have weaknesses in Kingsfield. For example, skeletons are weak to crushing weapons like maces and hammers, except it's not called crushing. I'm not sure how much of these inconsistencies are due to the unofficial translation, and if they're more accurate in the original Japanese. As I kill a mummy, I see a dead man lying on the ground, and on him is the Keeper's map. This is Hans, the deceased son of the man we spoke to earlier. Suspicious as he may be, I think he deserves to know his son is dead. Oh, you can't tell him. Okay, well, never mind then. Well, having the map sure is going to help me find my way around, and hopefully know what areas I have yet to go to. After backtracking a little bit, I find the Light family key. I guess we'll see what this does later. After wandering around for a while, I happened upon another shop. This one is owned by a guy named Gil Bacchus, and in his shop is the golden cross I've been searching for. He wants 1800 gold for it, which I do not have. He also has a lot better weapons and armor than the other shop. I sell a few things, but still don't have enough, so I decided to come back later. At least I know where to go next. I decided to head back to the starting area, and I find a new room has opened up directly across from Light's shop. This is the Dragon Fountain that opened up after I brought the Dragon Cup back. When you interact with it, your health and magic are immediately healed back to full. So, I'll be coming back here quite a few times over the course of the game. Pretty close by the fountain, there's a small staircase with 2 graves at the top right before a ledge, looking down on a small room with some skeletons in it. There isn't a way to get down there right now, but later in the game, there will be. I really like this. It made me think that the game's telling me that I'll be able to come back here later, but for now, all I can do is watch. I run around for a while, gathering up any items I missed, and finally, after selling a bunch of stuff, I get enough gold to buy the cross. I quickly head back to the priest and give him his beloved cross back. He thanks me by giving me a key. He also tells me about a bishop who can teach me healing magic on the 2nd floor. I'll keep that in mind when I head down there. In the meantime, there were a few doors and chests I couldn't open before, so I head back to try my new key on them. Whenever you come across something that's locked, it's more or less just a guessing game on which key you should try. The stairway to the 2nd floor is actually directly across from the church. The only problem is that it's rigged with arrow traps, so I need to find a way to disable them before I can continue onto the next floor. This seems like a good time to mention what happens when you die. You restart the game. It doesn't reload your last save, it sends you right back to the start. At least until you get a dragon tree fruit later in the game. You can buy them at the store as soon as you have enough money, but they're expensive, and without item descriptions, you're never really sure what you're getting until you use it. So, you have to save as much as possible, and when you restart after you die, then you can press start and go into system and then load your last save. I vaguely remember this being a thing with a few PlayStation games, and I think it's because of the memory cards required for saving. So if you don't have a memory card, it already skips any save loading and gets you right back into the game. I'm not 100% sure on that, so if anyone knows, be sure to let me know in the comments. After leaving the church again, this time I turn left and go down a hallway with a locked door at the end. This door can be unlocked with a key I just got from the priest. This is actually just a shortcut, and one that you only really need to use once. But even back in 1994, Fromsoftware were making games with winding levels that looped back on themselves in unexpected ways. Not quite to the level of Dark Souls, but it's really cool to see the precursor to a lot of the concepts that became huge in later games. I keep moving north, and finally come to another locked door. This one also unlocks with the key I just got. There's lots of undead here, mummies and skeletons, and these are the stronger variation. There's a couple of hidden pathways, with walls you can walk right through. At the end of the path, there's a button. I press it and move on. The button actually deactivates the arrow traps that are guarding the 2nd floor staircase. I head back to the church and talk to Ozzy for a little bit more dialogue. He says he gave his key to the priest because he felt bad about the cross being stolen. Ozzy got the key from the king, and it unlocks various places. Thanks, Ozzy. Helpful as always. As I run around looking for anything I might have missed, I find a secret area in the back of Ozzy's room. Inside is a skeleton guarding a treasure chest. This is something I absolutely love about this game. There are so many hidden rooms you might never find unless you use a consumable item you find later, use maps found on the internet, or run into every wall interacting with every suspicious area. Anyway, in the chest, there's a small shield. Awesome. And with that, I continue down to the 2nd floor. Going from the first floor to the second floor is a bit jarring. The monsters here are much stronger. Immediately, going left takes me to a save room with a guard in it. This is Eric. He seems to be in contact with Gil, the owner of the second shop. The commander is even lower in the crypt, but there's trouble down there. Move! Get out of my... God damn it, Eric! Occasionally, NPCs will block off entry or exit from a room, or get in between you and a save cross. Although, it only happened to me a couple of times during my playthrough. As I mentioned earlier, the monsters are much stronger, and there are also more variations of monsters as you get lower into the crypt. Here, I run into ghosts for the first time. They're highly resistant to melee attacks, but are weak to magic. They also tend to float up to the ceiling, making them even more difficult for melee. Unfortunately, the only reliable way I have to recover magic at this point is to return to the first floor fountain, which is very time consuming. Most enemies in Kingsfield are aggressive on sight, although ghosts seem to work differently. You can run past them very easily, and they sometimes won't attack you even when you're wailing on them. They're the first enemy I ran into that has a magic attack. It's a darkness curse, which severely limits my line of sight. Another new enemy on this floor are golems. They also have a very high defense and take a while to kill. After finishing them off, I find the Earth Seal Stone, an important quest item. There are 4 seal stones in total, and you can't proceed past the 3rd floor until you find all of them. This floor introduces a lot more traps, such as giant spike balls swinging from the ceiling. It's got a real Sen's Fortress vibe. I make my way into a hallway with several locked doors on either side. Inside one of those doors, there's a few enemies. The very last enemy in the corner drops a key. This is the only enemy in the entire game that drops a key, so it's a bit odd. I can imagine this giving people a bit of trouble if they weren't as thorough as I am. I almost compulsively have to look in every corner before I can move on. Next, I find a cave-like area, and inside a chest, I find the Water Seal Stone. Only 2 more to go. The priest on the first floor told me about a bishop who could teach me healing magic. I find him in the same area as the Water Stone. He says he's been searching for truth for a long time, and that everything, even magical artifacts, are powerless before truth. Alright, thanks broski. I guess I'll find you some truth. Maybe you'll trade it for healing magic. Next, I unlock a barred door with the dungeon key I found earlier. Inside, along with of course a bunch of enemies, I found another friendly NPC. This one is an elf lady. She says she's been waiting for me, and that in the deep darkness the king becomes more and more powerful. Our strength won't hold for long, so please come to us as soon as possible. Interesting, and a bit cryptic. This is the first instance of someone hinting that there's more at play than you may have initially thought. In the chest behind her, I find the green dragon rod. This item is indispensable. When you use it, it teleports you back up to the start of whatever floor you're on, making going back up to the first floor much less time consuming. In the same area, I find my first dragon tree fruit. As mentioned earlier, if I die while one's in my inventory, I'll respawn instead of having to restart and then reload. Also, when consumed, they'll heal both your HP and MP back to full. They become absolutely necessary later in the game. After finishing with the area I was in, I use the green dragon rod to head back to the first floor. I've done this a couple of times already, but I wanted to show off the item. If you play this game, you'll be making this trip quite a few times. The only shops are here, and you'll want to return to the fountain often, at least until you unlock the second healing location. I also take this opportunity to sell a few things. And seriously, this guy is Cartman! Look at him! I wonder if Matt Stone and Trey Parker ever played this game. It came out 3 years before the first episode of South Park, so it's not a reference to the show. Before I knew the timeline, I thought maybe it was a reference, but no. After returning to the second floor, I find the treasury, and it's filled with fireball-casting lizard dudes. They don't have a ton of health, but their magic can hit hard. Inside one of the chests, I find the truth mirror. This is what that bishop guy was talking about. If I bring him this mirror, he'll give me healing magic. The truth mirror actually has another purpose though. If you use it while standing in front of enemies and NPCs, it'll give you a description of them. You don't have to give it to the bishop, you just won't get healing magic. But there is another truth mirror in a hidden location later in the game. Just past the treasury is an area with a bunch of chasms. Some have small wooden bridges across them. Further down the path, there's a message on the wall from someone named Heinz. They need help, so off I go to find them. At the end of the path, I can hear the sound of a harp, and in a small cave, there's a guy sitting on a stump. He says he went blind from seeing too many horrible things. That and being wounded, and he needs a dragon tree fruit. I'm gonna take a wild guess and say it was probably the wound that blinded him. Luckily, I have that dragon tree fruit I found earlier, and he trades it for his harp. I go back to where I first heard the harp, and thought maybe I should use it here. When I do, a bridge rises up from the chasm so I can cross. I do this a few more times to reach a chest with a verdite inside. Verdite, named after the land the game takes place in, is a consumable item. When you use it, your magic skill levels up immediately. Aside from your total level, you can level up your strength and magic individually, and in the pause menu, you're assigned a class based on those levels. There are some equipment items in the game that can only be used effectively when you meet certain class title requirements. More on that later. In another chest, I find a moon charm. It's an equipable accessory. There are a few different accessories in the game, and they give various stat bonuses. I head back up to the first floor to heal and get a few more lines of dialogue. Cross says some priests built a tower of prayer on the 3rd floor, and if I'm wounded, to visit it. This is the second healing location, so after getting to the end of the 3rd floor, I'll only need to come back up here to occasionally sell stuff. Ozzy mentions that John's mother was from the royal family, and that she was a beautiful person. As mentioned earlier, John's mother was royal, and therefore could pass magic down to John. But she was good, unlike the rest of her family, so it was light magic instead of the dark magic the rest of them practiced. I head back down to the 2nd floor to talk to the bishop. He says he's completely disinterested in killing monsters or receiving bounty money, and he has no intention of helping me. But if I give him the truth mirror, he'll teach me some healing magic. He also warns me about golems on the 4th floor that are under the control of a dark magician. And with that, I head further down to the 3rd floor. Immediately, the music is more intense. It's actually the music from the opening cinematic before it shows the title of the game. Feel free to skip back to the beginning and see for yourself. The rooms in that cinematic also have these same textures, so the developers made that opening scene on this floor. I find it really interesting how they did stuff like that back then. Directly to the left of the stairs down, there's an area that looks awfully familiar. There's a well that mirrors the one at the very beginning on the 1st floor. It seems like the game is telling us that this area is connected to that one. And just around the corner, there's a teleporter. It leads directly back to the 1st floor. I end up in that area I saw earlier. By the dragon fountain, there were 2 graves and a room I couldn't get to with skeletons in it. This is that room. Once again, Fromsoftware is showing us they knew how to make an interconnected game way before Dark Souls was ever even thought of. Back to the 3rd floor. This actually isn't as much of a difficulty jump than it was from the 1st to the 2nd floor. Sure, the monsters are tough here, and a lot of them have spells, but you should get enough levels on the 2nd floor that they won't be too much of an issue. There are also a few new monsters here, such as living statues and different variations of golems. In a nearby room, I find Eric, the same guy from the 2nd floor. He congratulates me for making it this far, and then goes on to say that this floor is home to the graveyard of Randolph VIII, the previous king. Apparently, there's a lot of treasure here, but he's having trouble taking it because there's too many monsters. Good, I get it all to myself then. After fighting my way through a few monsters, I end up at the base of the Tower of Prayer. Cross, the priest from the first floor, mentioned this tower and that it could heal people. This is where the seal stones come in. Once all 4 seal stones are placed on their respective pedestals, the Tower of Prayer will open, and I'll be able to go through it. And at the top is a healing area. Every time you pass through it, you're healed to full HP and MP. So once I place the 2 stones in their rooms, off I go to find the remaining 2. There's also a secret area in the Tower of Prayer, and in it is a very good weapon, the Triple Fang. Not only does it have incredible damage, but while I have it equipped, it slowly regenerates my HP and MP. I make my way east and find myself at the tomb of Randolph VIII. There are a lot of enemies here to cut through, but at the center, I find Randolph himself waiting for me. I guess he's a ghost, but he looks pretty corporeal to me. He says that although he's sealed in his grave, he didn't lose his magical power to his foolish younger brother, and he gives that power, fire magic, to John. Randolph also mentions a swordmaster, the Black Knight, and says I won't stand a chance against him as I am, but to go retrieve his equipment from his 4 chambers and use it to defeat him. Before I can do that, there's a nearby chest with the fire seal stone inside. I take it, and then head west. The 4 chambers have a ton of hidden rooms, and inside them is some pretty good equipment, along with a few monsters, ghosts, lizards, and mummies. After dealing with them, I find Randolph's flame sword. It looks cool, but it's just nowhere near as good as the Triple Fang I found earlier. It does, however, have a special ability once you reach the rank of Swordmaster. If you time your magic just right at the end of a melee attack, you can shoot multiple fireballs at the same time. It took me a bit to figure out exactly how it works, but it's a really good ability, and it might be worth having lower offensive stats. Next, I find Randolph's Fire Chainmail. This is a really good piece of armor, and I'll be using it for pretty much the rest of the game. I continue on to the other side of Randolph's tomb, towards a cave-like area. There's a warning scratched into the wall. It says, "Be careful of the blades of wind." As usual, the place is filled with monsters, and there's items scattered around. In a few areas, I can hear the constant noise of what sounds like a magic spell being cast repeatedly. And after moving closer to it, I can see that it's a bunch of stone faces in the wall, shooting wind blades out of their mouths. They can't be destroyed, but luckily, they don't do much damage, and are fairly easy to avoid. The area has paths you can take that loop around the projectiles. Just off one of those paths, I find the Blood Mask. This mask has good stats, but I wouldn't recommend using it. It's cursed, so when you wear it, it constantly drains your hit points. It just doesn't seem worth it to me. At the end of the path, I find the Wind Seal Stone. Finally, I have all 4, and I start heading back towards the Tower of Prayer. After finally placing the Fire Seal Stone and the Wind Seal Stone in their rightful places, the Temple of Prayer opens back up, and at the top is the second healing location. Now, I only have to go back to the first floor to buy and sell. I continue down the other side of the Tower of Prayer, and at the end of a long hall is the entrance to the 4th floor. The 4th floor is pretty big, and this is probably the most confusing floor so far. The first little bit is very maze-like. As usual, there's lots of enemies, mostly golems from this point on. They have a decent amount of hit points and can hit pretty hard, but at this point in the game I've mastered the 1-2 punch melee then magic combo, so I don't get hit as often, and the HP and MP regen of the Triple Fang keeps my health up enough that I don't have to use as many healing items. This seems like as good a point as any to talk about the sound design. As you've no doubt noticed so far, the music is extremely repetitive. It feels like a 30-second loop of music, and it was driving me a bit nuts. After a while, I managed to focus enough that it mostly got tuned out. The sound options are extremely limited too. I thought maybe if I could turn down the music volume a bit, it would be a bit more palatable. But The only options are on or off. You can turn the music on or off, and you can turn the sound effects on or off. Although, this is one thing you can definitely chalk up to the age of the game. Getting back to the 4th floor, after making my way out of the maze, I get to an area with lots of traps, and a small room with a rock flying around in circles like a centrifuge. The only area safe from the rock trap is in the direct middle of the room, except that space is occupied by 2 golems. There's no room to fight them without taking damage, and the second one dies, it immediately respawns. So I quickly run around the room, looking in the 2 chests while dodging both the rock and the golems, and in the second chest, I find the Magician's Map. This is the final map in the game, and it reveals everything. Every secret area is recorded on this map. It's extremely useful. Heading past a few traps, I run into another maze-like area. Here, there are arrow traps and massive holes lying around that kill you if you fall down them. In a nearby chest, I find an awesome shield, the Black Dragon. Just all around great stats. Up ahead, I run into some new enemies, jumping statues. They'd be pretty tough even if they didn't jump around, but add that in, and they make for a very annoying fight. But at least it's interesting. Nearby, I find a knight lying on the ground. He tells me that the commander, John's father, and the Black Knight killed each other in battle. His sword was left at his grave. Up ahead in a secret area, I find the Shadow Blade. This is the best weapon so far, but it has a strange curse. When I equip it, it darkens my field of vision and severely limits how far I can see. I decide against using it for the time being. I find a ghost nearby who knows about John's father. He says he didn't think anyone could kill the Black Knight, and because John's father did something so remarkable, the ghost made him a grave. I finally make my way to the center of this floor, the Saturn Shrine. Inside, there's a new variation of golem. These ones have much more health, and throw giant rocks at me. Inside the chest they were guarding, I find the Magician's Key. This is the final key in the game. It unlocks every other chest that hasn't already been opened. In the hallway ahead, there's a bunch of golems guarding a series of treasure chests. At this point in the game, most of the remaining chests have Verdite in them. Verdite is the consumable I mentioned earlier that raises your magic level when used. This is for a very specific reason that I'll get into in a bit. But one of the chests contained feather boots. These probably look pretty familiar to most people. I know they definitely did to me. They're basically the hover boots from Zelda Ocarina of Time. They work in basically the same way, except they don't have a time limit for how long you stay in the air. I can now walk right over the pitfall traps that insta-killed me before. In this same area, just to the side, I find the grave of Hauser Forrester, John's father. And next to the grave is his weapon, the Dragon Sword. Unfortunately, this sword also isn't as good as the Triple Fang. It has less damage, and its special ability slowly recovers just MP, as opposed to the HP and MP of the Triple Fang. This actually disappointed me a bit. I was really hoping that the sword of John's father would be a lot stronger. After opening one of the last doors, I see a ghost firing magic at me. It's guarded by 2 golems, and after killing them, I face the ghost, who after being struck once, turns into a hellish skeleton monster. These are extremely dangerous. They have the most powerful spell in the game, Lightning Bolt, and its range is absolutely insane. Luckily, I kept close enough to it that it didn't get the chance to fire one off. After killing it, I head through the door and onto the 5th and final floor. The 5th floor is absolutely nuts. It's very fast-paced. and the enemies do a lot of damage. That skeleton monster I just fought, they're everywhere on this floor, and they constantly use lightning bolt, which you'll see just how much damage it can do. At this point, I decide to equip the Shadow Blade. I need the extra damage, and I can deal with the limited visibility. Remember when I said there was a reason most of the remaining chests were filled with Verdite? Well, on the 5th floor, I'm pretty sure you're supposed to have lightning bolt. And if I had gone around and opened every treasure chest that I missed, then I would have enough Verdite to get the lightning bolt spell. It seems to unlock after you get a certain level in your magic skill. So now I'm running around just trying to survive this floor without the proper tools. But I make do. I fight through a lot of enemies and use way too many healing items, but I finally get to a big set of doors. I open them and walk in. Inside I see Miria, the elf woman who I ran into on the 2nd floor. She serves the dragon of the forest, who is an actual dragon. Not just some person, as the opening crawl almost seemed to hint towards. She apparently appears to certain people to convey the dragon's will to them. She says, "With all the power left in us, we remove all the seals and restore light to the sword. Use both the power of the magic and the power of the sword. Please, you must not fail in closing the door of darkness." And with that, she summons the Moonlight Sword, hovering in front of me. The music stops, and... wait a second. It crashed. Wow. Awesome. Just gotta restart the game. Good thing I saved just before I walked into that room. While we're back here again, just how great is the PlayStation startup sound? I love it. Brings back so many memories. I reload my file, and I'm back. The Moonlight Sword once again spins around, hovering directly in front of me. Then it drops to the ground, and I pick it up. Before I leave, I use the truth mirror on the forest dragon. It says, "Since ancient times, it has lived in the forest and defended the people. While it is spoken of in legend, and many people believe in it, few have ever seen it. This is the dragon who gave the sword to the Forrester family in the days of old." I'm not entirely sure why this event is being referenced as if it happened in the distant past, but if I had to guess, it's probably due to the translation. Anyway, I equipped the Moonlight Sword before heading out of the room. This is, of course, the most powerful weapon in the game. It has the same HP and MP recovery that the Triple Fang has, but it deals way more damage. Now it's time to go to the other sealed doors. Miria has unsealed all of them, so it's time to retrieve the magical artifacts from within. Heading back to the 1st floor, I take this opportunity to stock up on Dragon Tree fruit. At this point in the game, you have everything you're possibly going to need, so you can safely sell pretty much everything else in your inventory, and spend all the money on Dragon Tree fruit. One thing I want to mention while I'm here on the shop screen is how long it takes to buy and sell stuff. First of all, there's no option to buy or sell multiples of anything, so if you want to sell 10 items, you need to go into the sell menu 10 times, because every time you sell one item, it boots you back to the previous menu. It's a needlessly clunky process. I can chalk this one up to the game being old, but this is definitely something that could have used a bit more thought. After I finish with the shop, I head to the unsealed doors. Inside the first one is the Mist Mask, the headpiece of the magical set of armor. Before I head back down to the 2nd floor, I thought I'd catch up with my old 1st floor friends, Jude's Cross and Ozzy. Cross says if this is to be a battle between good and evil, I want to believe that good always prevails. Me too, Cross. Me too. Ozzy mentions a minstrel that went down below with the soldiers. Yeah, he's totally good. He's no longer blinded, sitting in a cave alone surrounded by monsters. He'll be fine. While I was looking for external materials during my research, I came across the Kingsfield game manual in Japanese. I input one of the pages that listed some of the characters into Google Translate, and it translated Cross's name to Judas, which totally makes sense to me that an edgy Japanese company might make a character named Judas Cross a priest, like an amalgam of Judas and Jesus. At least, that's what came to my mind. Make of it what you will. Now, I head towards the unsealed doors on the second floor. Inside is the second piece of the magical set of armor, the Wind Guard. And with only one last piece to find, I head down to the third floor. Behind the last unsealed doors lies the forest armor. This is the best and final piece of armor in the game. Now that I have the full set of magical armor, along with the Moonlight Sword and the most powerful spell at my disposal, I am fully prepared to head back down to the 5th floor and face the great evil that so many have died trying to defeat. Back on the 5th floor, I begin to fight my way to the final boss. At this stage in the game, there isn't much point in doing anything other than use Lightning Bolt. It basically kills everything in one shot, and it has incredible range. So on the 5th floor, it's essentially just me and the enemies shooting lightning bolts at each other. After running around trying to figure out where to go, I find a hidden door, and an area with floating torches, and fireballs shooting out of the walls. As you can see, there's no floor to walk on, but since I have the feather boots, I can float across this chasm. On the opposite side, there's a few dragon tree fruit, and to the right is a teleporter. I head towards the teleporter. When I go through, I'm in a very large area with massive monsters. This reminds me of Super Mario 64, the Little Big World level. In this room, there are 4 teleporters. One takes me back to where I just was, and the other 3 take me to various places on the 5th floor. I find the right one, and it takes me to the final boss. This area is crawling with demons. After taking them out, I see a statue. It's Reinhardt II. He's been turned to stone. I run across the nearby bridge. Fireballs are shooting in every direction. And then up ahead, I see him. The final boss is some weird tree monster with a large white face. He says, "I never expected that sword was the magical artifact. If you came to defeat my father, you missed your chance. He's the one who's stone over there. I will spare you if you leave the sword. If you don't want to, I'll be happy to send you to the grave with your father. Then I will use you as my servant sometime." And then the battle begins. This fight was honestly a bit of a disappointment. Essentially, the entire fight boils down to shooting lightning bolts at the boss, while attempting to dodge his spells, killing the odd monster that spawns in, and using dragon tree fruit every few seconds. He has quite a bit of health, but after a few minutes, Reinhardt III is dead. And that's it. I turn around and walk back across the bridge. The fireballs have stopped. And as I walk through the portal, the credits roll. Now for my closing thoughts. I really enjoyed Kingsfield. It's too bad this game never released outside of Japan. I have a feeling I would have been really into it as a kid. Now, just because I really enjoyed it doesn't necessarily mean you will too. I'm a sucker for old video games. Some of my favorite games ever released in the 90s. There's just something so endearing to me about dated graphics and clunky movement, but also, there's just so much heart. This game doesn't feel like shareholders or executives had any hand in it. It feels like it was the passion project of a small, dedicated group of gamers. I don't exclusively play older video games. I enjoy a lot of modern ones, but for different reasons. Kingsfield doesn't have a tutorial. It doesn't tell you how to play or how to experience it. You're left to figure it out on your own. I feel like that's something that's desperately missing from modern video games. Sometimes I just really want to be thrown into the deep end and left on my own to figure out how to survive. Of course, Kingsfield isn't a perfect game. I don't actually think a perfect game exists. Much like a perfect person, It's something to strive towards, but not necessarily to ever reach. There were definitely areas that could have been improved on, such as the sound design. Maybe the music could have been a bit more varied. And I really wish the turning sensitivity was higher, and much of the UI could have been greatly improved. But, as a first title, Kingsfield is incredible. Fromsoftware truly has been making amazing games even from the very start, before Miyazaki was ever involved with the company, and it's easy to see the inspiration of what will one day become Dark Souls. All in all, I had a great time playing Kingsfield. I played through it 3 times, and if you enjoy older games as much as I do, I would highly recommend that you play it too. So, for my score, I give Kingsfield an 8.5 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. And also, if you have the time, leave a comment. I would love to hear from you. As I mentioned before, this is my very first video, but I'm going to keep them coming. So stay tuned for more, and have an amazing day.